My name is Brielle Carter, and I never thought a joke from my own brother would almost end my life. I wish I could say it was a surprise, but the truth is, my brother had been trying to break me my entire life. He just finally got close to succeeding. One minute, I was walking past the top of the stairs at our parents' house, the familiar scent of my mum's lemon cleaner in the air. The next, his hand shoved me, hard. There was no anger in the push, no rage. There was just laughter. The same casual, cruel laughter I'd heard 1,000 times before. My head hit the thick oak railing with a sound that wasn't just a noise. It was a feeling. A deep, hollow crack that seemed to echo inside my skull. My body followed, tumbling down the carpeted steps like a doll thrown by a careless child. My world went from the warm, yellow light of the hallway to a splintering, chaotic darkness. And then, it went black. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me, where in the world are you watching from? When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the relentless, rhythmic beeping of a machine next to my ear. The second was the sterile, chemical smell of a hospital. My head pounded with a pain so immense it felt like a physical presence in the room. A brace was tight around my neck, holding me completely still. But the worst part, the part that made the cold dread seep into my veins, was the look on the doctor's face when he walked in with a clipboard. He looked at me with a kind of pity that had nothing to do with the fall down the stairs. He looked at me like my life had just been split into two distinct parts, the time before and the time after. He cleared his throat. "Brielle," he began, his voice low and steady. "The MRI showed us something we weren't expecting. The fall. It might have been a good thing you came in." He paused, and in that silence I knew. I knew the shove, the fall, and the pain were just the beginning. The MRI had found something much bigger and far more dangerous than a concussion. Growing up, our house was a stage, and my older brother, Mason, was the star. I was just part of the scenery, something for him to use as a prop. He had a cruel streak, a darkness that he hid behind a charming smile that fooled everyone but me. When I was 6, he took my favorite doll, a porcelain girl named Lily with soft brown curls, and snapped her head off in front of me. He twisted it until the porcelain neck cracked and shattered. I screamed, hot tears streaming down my face. My mom came running in, took one look at the scene, and let out a tired sigh. She scooped him into a hug. "Oh, Mason," she said, laughing it off. "Boys will be boys." He didn't mean it, Brielle. He did mean it. I saw it in his eyes. He watched me cry with a look of deep, satisfied curiosity. When I was 12, I got a new bike for my birthday. It was bright blue, my favorite color, with a white basket on the front. I loved it more than anything. A week later, Mason dared me to ride it down the steep hill at the end of our street. "I'll time you," he said, dangling a stopwatch. "Bet you can't beat my record." I wanted so badly to impress him, to finally be the cool younger sister, so I did it. I pedaled as fast as I could, the wind whipping through my hair. Halfway down, the front wheel started to wobble violently. I squeezed the brakes, but nothing happened. He had loosened them. The bike jackknifed, throwing me over the handlebars and onto the gravel. I came home with bloody knees, a sprained wrist, and torn jeans, dragging my broken bike behind me. My dad took one look at me and his face hardened. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice full of disappointment. When I tried to explain that Mason had done something to the brakes, my dad cut me off. "Don't blame your brother for your own carelessness, Brielle. You need to be less sensitive." Too sensitive. That was their favorite phrase for me. It was the excuse they used for everything. When Mason, accidentally, tripped me in front of my friends, I was too sensitive for being embarrassed. When he told my crush a made-up, humiliating story about me, I was too sensitive for crying about it. When he'd lock me in the basement pantry for fun, the sound of his footsteps, walking away as I banged on the door, I was too sensitive for being scared of the dark. Over the years, I learned to survive. I made myself smaller, quieter. I learned that keeping the peace meant swallowing my pain, my anger, my fear. It meant letting Mason win, every single time. Because in my family, peace was more important than I was. My role was to absorb the blows, both physical and emotional, so that the perfect family picture would never be disturbed. I became a ghost in my own home, careful not to make a sound, careful not to take up too much space, hoping that if I was invisible enough, he would finally leave me alone. The invitation for family dinner felt less like a request and more like a summons. I was 24, living in a small apartment an hour away, finally building a life for myself where I wasn't just Mason's little sister. But the pull of family obligation was strong, a thick rope tied around my waist that they could tug whenever they wanted. I drove to their house that Saturday with a familiar sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. The moment I walked in, the performance began. Mason was holding court in the living room, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. And then my boss pulled me aside, he was saying, his voice booming with self-importance, and told me the promotion was mine. Senior vice president, comes with a nice corner office and a brand new company car. "Oh, Mason, that's wonderful," my mother gushed, beaming at him as if he had just cured a disease. My dad clapped him on the shoulder. "That's my boy. Knew you had it in you. We're so proud of all your hard work." They both looked at me, their smiles expectant. "Isn't that amazing, Brielle?" Mom asked. "Congratulations, Mason," I said, my voice flat. I kept my eyes on the floor. I knew what they wanted. They wanted me to gush, to praise him, to play my part as the adoring little sister. I just didn't have it in me anymore. Dinner was more of the same. Mason bragged about his investments, his trips, his perfect life. He made little jabs at me, the way he always did. "How's that little graphic design thing going, Brielle?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Still drawing cartoons for a living?" "It's going well," I said quietly, pushing a green bean around my plate. "You know, my company is looking for a new marketing lead. It's a real job. Maybe you should apply, though it's probably out of your league," he added, winking at our dad. My dad chuckled. "She's happy with her hobbies, son." My work wasn't a hobby. It was my career. I was talented, and I was building a client base from scratch. But in their eyes, his 6-figure salary was a success, and my freelance career was a cute little pastime. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I just sat there, silent, letting their words wash over me. I had learned long ago that fighting back only made it worse. It gave Mason the reaction he craved. My silence seemed to bother him more than any argument could have. He wanted me to get angry. He wanted me to cry. He wanted a reaction. When he got none, I saw a shift in his eyes. The playful smirk disappeared and was replaced by a cold, calculating look. It was the look he got right before he did something he knew was wrong. He had a new plan. After dinner, as we were clearing the plates, I mentioned I was cold and was going to get my coat from the guest room upstairs. "I'll be right back," I said, heading for the hallway. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, I felt a shadow behind me. I knew it was him. The air grew heavy, just like it always did when he was near. I started walking up the stairs, my hand on the smooth, worn railing, when I heard his footsteps quicken behind me. I was 3 steps from the top of the landing. I could see the open door to the guest bedroom, the corner of my dark blue coat draped over a chair. I was almost there. "Hey, Brielle." Mason's voice was right behind me, laced with a familiar, chilling amusement. I started to turn, my mouth opening to ask what he wanted. Before I could get a word out, he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Let's see if you can fly," he said. Then his hand slammed into the middle of my back. It wasn't a nudge or a playful push. It was a violent, committed shove, designed to send me forward with unstoppable force. My feet left the stairs. For a split second, I was airborne, suspended in the air between the top step and the wall. Time seemed to slow down. I remember the rough texture of the wallpaper scraping against my cheek. I remember the sound, a sickening crack, as my head connected with the thick wooden railing. It wasn't a dull thud. It was a sharp, definitive sound, like a branch snapping in two. My body went limp. I tumbled down the rest of the stairs, each impact a fresh burst of pain. My shoulder hit a step, my hip, my knee. I felt the metallic taste of blood fill my mouth. At the bottom, I lay in a crumpled heap on the hardwood floor of the entryway, staring up at the ceiling light, which was blurry and swimming in my vision. The last thing I heard before the world faded to black was my mother's faint gasp, followed by my father's angry curse. And then, Mason's voice, not with worry, but with a flicker of panic for himself. "Crap," he muttered. "I didn't mean to push her that hard." The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed. The world came back to me in fragments. The bright, sterile lights, the quiet, urgent whispers of nurses, the steady, terrifying rhythm of the heart monitor. My head was screaming in pain, a deep, throbbing agony that pulsed with every beat of my heart. My neck was locked in a brace, forcing me to stare straight up at the ceiling tiles. I was trapped inside my own body. The doctor's name was Dr. Evans. He had kind eyes, but they were filled with a professional sorrow that scared me more than anything else. "Brielle," he said, pulling a chair close to my bed. "You have a severe concussion and some deep bruising, but we ordered an MRI just to be safe, to check for any internal bleeding in the brain." I nodded, a tiny movement that sent a fresh wave of pain through my skull. My parents and Mason were standing in the corner of the room, whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew what they were talking about. They weren't whispering about my health. They were whispering about their story. What they would say happened, how they would protect Mason. The wait for the MRI results was agonizing. Every tick of the clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow. My parents tried to talk to me. Mom kept patting my hand, saying, "It was just a silly accident, honey. We know Mason didn't mean it." Dad stood by the window, his arms crossed, his face a mask of frustration. "We'll handle this," he kept saying, as if I were a mess that needed to be cleaned up. Mason wouldn't even look at me. He just stared at his phone, his face pale. He wasn't sorry. He was scared. Scared of the trouble he was in. When Dr. Evans came back, the atmosphere in the room changed. He wasn't walking with the brisk, efficient pace of a doctor delivering good news. He moved slowly, deliberately. He held the film from the MRI in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at me. "The fall didn't cause any bleeding," he began, and I felt a tiny flicker of relief. But it was quickly extinguished by the look in his eyes. His face darkened. "But we found something else." He put the film up on the light box on the wall, and the room went quiet. He pointed to a small, shadowy mass deep inside the images of my brain. It was a dark spot in a sea of grey. "We found a growth," he said, his voice soft. "A tumor. Based on its location and characteristics, we believe it's an anaplastic astrocytoma. It's been there for a while, growing silently." The words didn't make sense at first. Tumor, growth, astrocytoma. They were just sounds, technical terms from a medical drama. Then, the meaning crashed down on me. There was something inside my head, something that didn't belong, something that was killing me slowly from the inside out. My entire world shifted on its axis. My brother's cruel, violent act, the thing that was meant to hurt me, had inadvertently saved me. The shove might have just saved my life by discovering what could have killed me silently. The irony was so bitter, so profound, it almost made me want to laugh. Dr. Evans continued to explain. He talked about biopsies, surgery, radiation, survival rates. His voice was calm and compassionate, a steady anchor in the storm that had become my life, but I wasn't really listening to him. I was watching my family. When the doctor explained everything, laying out the terrifying reality of a brain tumor in front of us, my mother's eyes filled with tears. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought they were for me. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the shock of this news would finally make her see me. Her daughter, the one who was hurt, the one who was sick. But then she turned her head, and her gaze found Mason, who was standing frozen against the far wall. She walked over to him, put her hands on his arms, and whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Don't worry, sweetie," she said, just loud enough for me to hear. "We'll say it was an accident. We'll say you just bumped into her and she lost her balance. No one needs to know." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for him, for the trouble he was in. My dad stepped forward, his face grim. He wasn't looking at me either. He was looking at Dr. Evans, then at Mason. "Let's be clear," he said, his voice low and firm. "Brielle is not pressing charges. It was an accident, a clumsy mistake. Pressing charges would ruin his career. It would destroy this family." Not one word about my diagnosis, not one question about the surgery, not one expression of concern for the fact that I might not survive. In the single most terrifying moment of my life, their first and only instinct was to protect my abuser. A profound, chilling clarity washed over me. I was utterly and completely alone. The family I had spent my entire life trying to please didn't exist. It was a sham. I was not their daughter. I was a prop. I was a supporting character in the Mason show. And my life, my actual life, was less important than his career. Something inside me broke, but it wasn't the part of me that felt pain or sadness. It was the part that held out hope, the part that kept forgiving them. It snapped clean in two, and in its place, something cold and hard and quiet began to form. I didn't yell. I didn't scream or cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply looked at my father and said, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, "I need some space." Then I looked at the nurse who had been quietly observing from the doorway. "Could you please limit my visitors?" I asked. "I'd like to rest." The look on my parents' faces was one of stunned confusion. They were used to my tears, my submission. They didn't know how to handle this quiet, firm stranger in the hospital bed. The nurse nodded and gently ushered them out of the room. The silence they left behind was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. The next day, while recovering from the initial fall, I used my phone to do a search. Personal injury lawyers near me. I found a woman with a kind face and a long list of successful cases. Her name was Sarah. I called her office from my hospital bed. "My brother pushed me down the stairs," I told her, my voice clear and steady. "The fall led to the discovery of a brain tumor. My parents are trying to cover it up." Sarah listened patiently, without interruption. When I was done, there was a pause on the other end of the line. I thought she might not believe me. "Brielle," she said finally, her voice full of a firm kindness I wasn't used to, "I believe you, and I can help you." She came to the hospital that afternoon. I sat there, in my gown and neck brace, and told her everything. I told her about the broken doll, the sabotaged bike, the years of small cruelties and physical harassment that my parents had dismissed as boys being boys. For the first time, someone listened and validated my experience. She didn't tell me I was too sensitive. She told me I was a victim of abuse. Over the next few weeks, as I prepared for the surgery, we worked. We gathered the hospital records that documented the assault. We found old-school nurse reports from my childhood, detailing injuries that were always explained away as me being clumsy. We even found text messages on my old phone. One from Mason, after a particularly nasty fight a year earlier, read, "Watch your back. One of these days, I might almost kill you for real, Lowell." He thought it was a joke. Sarah called it evidence. The day of my surgery, no one from my family was there. I had told the hospital they were not to be allowed in. I went into that operating room alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt a sense of purpose. I was no longer just trying to survive a tumor. I was fighting for my life in every possible way. 2 months later, I was different. The surgery was successful. The surgeons had managed to remove the entire tumor. I had a long, thin scar hidden behind my hairline, a permanent reminder of what I had survived. I was physically weaker, still tired easily, but mentally, I had never felt stronger. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I found out through a cousin that my parents were throwing a welcome home brunch for me. It wasn't for me, of course. It was for them. A performance for their friends and extended family to show that everything was fine, that we were all one big happy family again. They assumed that after surviving brain surgery, I would have gotten over the little incident on the stairs. They assumed I would fall back into line. I decided to go. I walked into my parents' house for the first time since the fall. The living room was filled with people, the sound of polite laughter and clinking glasses. My parents were in the center of the room, holding court. Mason was next to them, laughing at something one of my uncles said. He looked relaxed, confident. He had gotten away with it again. When they saw me standing in the doorway, a hush fell over the room. I wasn't smiling. I didn't walk over to them for a hug. I just stood there, my presence a silent accusation. My mother recovered first. "Brielle, honey, you're here," she said, her voice artificially bright. She started walking towards me, her arms outstretched. Just then, there was a knock at the open front door. A man in a simple suit stepped inside. He held a large manila envelope. "I'm looking for Mason Carter," the man said, his voice polite but firm. Mason's smile faded. "I'm Mason Carter," he said, confused. The man walked directly to him and held out the envelope. "You've been served." Mason took the papers, his brow furrowed. He opened the envelope and began to read. I watched his face change. The confusion turned to disbelief. The disbelief turned to shock. The shock drained all the color from his face, leaving behind a pale, sickly gray. My dad rushed over to him. "What is this? What's going on?" Mason just stared at me, his jaw slack. "She's suing me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "For assault, and for years of abuse." My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with betrayal. "How could you?" she hissed. "How could you do this to your brother, to this family?" I finally looked at her. I finally looked at all of them, and I felt nothing but a quiet, calm finality. "You protected him," I said, my voice even and clear, cutting through the silence of the room. "So I had to protect myself." I turned around and walked out the door, leaving the ruins of their perfect family picture shattered on the floor behind me. The fallout was swift and decisive. Mason's company, a large financial firm that prided itself on its image, placed him on indefinite leave as soon as the assault charges became public. The story of the successful VP, who pushed his sister down the stairs, became a piece of whispered gossip in his professional circles. His career, the thing my parents had valued more than my safety, was in shambles. Facing a mountain of evidence, including the hospital reports and his own text messages, Mason's lawyers advised him to settle the civil case quickly and quietly. The settlement I received was substantial. It wasn't just money, it was an acknowledgement. It was a price tag for my pain, for the years of terror, for the surgery I never should have needed to discover. The money, along with the insurance payouts, covered all of my medical bills and my recovery. With what was left, I did something I had only dreamed of. I bought a small house for myself in a town 300 miles away. It had a little garden in the back and a sunny room that I turned into my art studio. The first time I turned the key in the lock of my own front door, I felt a sense of peace that was so profound it brought tears to my eyes. It was a safety I had never known. It was mine. I never returned to my parents' house. They tried to call at first. They left tearful, angry voicemails. They didn't understand. They said I had destroyed the family. They never once apologized. They never once asked how I was feeling. My last words to them were on a brief final phone call a few months later. "We just want things to go back to the way they were," my mother had cried. I took a deep breath. "The way things were almost killed me," I said simply, and then I hung up. I blocked their numbers and never spoke to them again. Sometimes I think about the bitter irony of it all. The tumor was a silent monster, growing in the dark, but so was my brother's cruelty. One was a disease of the body, the other a disease of the soul that had infected my entire family. In the end, the thing that was meant to destroy me, that final violent shove, was the very thing that uncovered the monster and saved my life. It forced the darkness into the light. If you have ever been told you're too sensitive, or that you should just laugh it off when something hurts you, please listen to me. Your feelings are valid. Your pain is real. Don't wait for a fall down the stairs to save you. Protect yourself. Find your voice and use it. Because silence doesn't keep the peace, it only protects the abuser.